Baroness Bennett of Manor Castle.
My Lords, I speak to move Amendment 93, which appears in my name. We started this day, the final day of Committee on the National Security and Investment Bill, with an advantage we have not previously enjoyed: access, finally, to the integrated review of security, defence, development and foreign policy. If only just, it appeared on the government website about an hour before our debate started. But it is particularly useful in presenting this amendment, particularly given our debate thus far, which has often been stuck in a very narrow and pre-21st century idea of what delivers security. While certainly the term cyber has been thrown around a lot, and there are provisions that do address, and we have debated, crucial issues of resilience and the dangers of complex, interlinked technological systems. Although it has been noticeable that the answers always seem to involve more complex technology, rather than consideration of what technology should and should not be doing and the dangers it represents. I note the important work, for example, of the NGO Drone Wars in this area. But I have to doubt, with the greatest respect to the participants, the level of expertise in covering these complex, fast-moving, highly technical areas of cybersecurity. It's a pity we've not seen some of the House's cyber experts in this committee. I noted in the Financial Services Bill just how thin the debate was, how small the number of peers participating and how short are many of the debates. I note the adjective furtive used by the Noble Lord, Lord Clement Jones, in the last group. That's in stark contrast to the Domestic Abuse Bill, with scores of members of your Lordship's House passionately engaged, as is a broad swathe of civil society. That observation applies even more strongly in this committee. But all we can do is what we can do, and in this amendment, I'm obviously on natural ground for a Green peer. But then, as a talk show host said to me recently, everyone's talking green now. I've been skim reading the integrated review and can confirm just that. In the foreword, the Prime Minister says that, quote, COVID-19 has reminded us that security threats and tests of national resilience can take many forms. Yes, the existence of nuclear weapons is clearly a huge security threat. The world cannot be secure until the global ban on these hideous weapons of mass destruction is delivered. That is a threat we intend to increase is a decision that can only be described as incredibly dangerous, heightening tension in an unstable world. I also remind the committee that the Trident nuclear replacement has been forecast to cost nearly £200 billion over its lifetime. Surely more now, if more weapons, while the government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution has a budget of £12 billion. Choices are being made, choices that are terrifyingly bad for the security of all of us. So thinking about the government's decision-making under this bill, what if a key manufacturer of wind turbine components were to be threatened with takeover by a company wanting to convert it to a weapons manufacturer, to pump out more arms into a world already awash with them? It would be a lose-lose for national security. Amendment 93 addresses particularly one side of that scenario, the climate, environmental and ecological emergencies, fittingly being debated on a day when we are reminded of the dangerously poor state of our natural world, with the disappearance of yet another hen harrier beside a grouse moor. And before the whips start questioning what hen harriers have to do with national security, I'll paraphrase a long-term Green saying: there is no security on a dead or dying planet, or in a country with a collapsed natural world. Or if you prefer, I'll quote the financial costs identified in the integrated review. Nature loss could result in a cumulative economic cost of up to $10 trillion between 2011 and 2050. Should we have, we can but hope, a company making, say, massive strides in restoring a large spread of our carbon-depleted, nature-raised uplands, its takeover by another with the intentions of returning to driven grouse shooting management would be a security issue for the nation, a climate issue, a biodiversity issue, and of course very directly an issue for the flood-threatened communities downstream of it. The Prime Minister's foreword to the integrated review says that, quote, Her Majesty's government will make tackling climate change and biodiversity loss its #1 international priority, close quotes. Albeit that is in the final paragraph of the second page of a 2.5-page foreword. But I did a little analysis of our committee's debates thus far, looking for mentions of the climate emergency, and excluding occasions when the word climate appeared in the context of investment climate. On day one, the word did not come up once. On day two, it did, when I referred to it. Lord Grantchester did twice mention the net zero carbon target on day one. As for nature, in the biodiversity sense, or ecology, that didn't come up. Although I will give credit to the noble Lord Grimston of Boscombe, who does appear to have a pleasing attachment to offshore wind farms as a case study. I again remind the committee that climate change and biodiversity loss are, in the government's own words, our number one international priority. Now, the integrated review recommends we establish a whole society approach to resilience, which will allow us to consider threats and hazards in the round. It emphasises the understanding that the best foundation of a successful foreign policy is a cohesive and well-functioning society and environment. So what I'm seeking to do with this amendment is to help the government to make this bill fit that political environment, an attempt to broaden its understanding of and approach to security. And this is also, like the group starting with Amendment 70, an attempt to increase the transparency of the operation of the bill and its democratic scrutiny. Something, again, the Prime Minister's introduction to the integrated review stresses as a competitive advantage of the UK. Now, I'm not going to be tempted at this moment to digress into questioning the focus in the integrated review on competition, when what the world needs at COP15 and COP26 in tackling pressing issues of poverty and inequality, food insecurity, is cooperation. Security is not a zero-sum game. We all gain from more of it. Any noble lord seeking an alternative approach might like to follow the Rethinking Security Network's 3-year alternative security review that has the objective of changing the way that UK security policy is generated, based on an approach that promotes peace, human well-being and environmental sustainability, what's known for shorthand as the human security approach. And for clarity, I mean that in the broad sense used by the United Nations, not the narrow definition, more or less interchangeable with protection of civilians, often used by our armed forces. However, as Rethinking Security does, the government agrees that democracy in the UK is important, and I would think, uncontroversially, that transparency and scrutiny are essential to democracy. So that's what this Amendment 93 seeks to do. It's a fairly typical publisher statement on how the provision of this Act will be exercised, focusing, as I've already outlined, on the climate, environmental and ecological impacts affecting national security. And I think perhaps element C of the amendment is most crucial, the list of conditions in which it is likely that the actions or omissions of a qualifying entity or a qualifying asset are likely to be deemed a risk to national security. I come back to Lord Grimstone's offshore wind farms and my driven grass moors. I go to the obvious recent issue of availability of personal protective equipment and the ongoing issue of availability of vaccines and the materials to produce vaccines. We could think about the national security implications of decisions already taken or not taken, the selling off of the water companies to private firms, the selling off of control of electricity supplies, what might happen with green hydrogen. I could continue coming up with an off the top of my head list, but that's not the point. What this amendment aims to do is ensure that the government comes up with a considered list of criteria and there's a chance for a democratic debate around it. This is a dangerous world where, in an age of shocks, our security is in grave danger. We need to know what the government plans are when it comes to investments affecting climate and ecological emergencies.